We want to review a little bit. And we've been talking about how this is a play, and as you visualize a play, the curtains close and they open and the scene changes. And you remember last week when the curtains opened for the first time, she was in Solomon's tents being inspected and interviewed to see if she was going to be a new one of his wives. And we remember how her speech indicated that she was frightened and uncertain about this, but yet there was enough glamour and for her that she didn't quite want to make up her mind at this point that she was going to leave the shepherd. So the first scene is opened up on her expressing her discomfort and her anxiousness. She told the maidens that she was black, but she was lovely, had a good self-conscious or self-image in her view of herself. The curtains closed, and then as the curtains opened again, we saw her and King Solomon dining together, and they have their conversation together as he admires her beauty. And then in chapter 2, the Song of Solomon is where she said she was the rose of Sharon, the lily of the valleys, and told about how it was that she had this good, healthy self-image, and she could be particular about who it is that she married. And then today we're going to start with scene number 3. And scene number 3 begins in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 8. And this scene does not tell us exactly where she is, except Solomon is no longer there and the maidens are no longer there. She is all by herself. And then when we get into chapter 3, verse 1, we're going to see scene number 4. In scene number 4, in Song of Solomon, chapter 3, verse 1, she is in bed having a dream. She is sleeping and having a dream. So it seems logical that probably where she is for scene number 3 is that she is back in her particular room inside the tent. And you remember how we said that their tents had many rooms like our houses, and they could be just as large as our houses. So she's probably somewhere private, just by herself, having a chance to reflect over all the things that has happened during the day. She's going to do what she always does, and that is she is going to remember the shepherd. So she's in her room, probably getting ready for bed and just reflecting. And the first thing she's going to do is she's going to think about the shepherd. And we're going to see that she very frequently talks about him being like a gazelle or a young stag. And as we read this in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 8 through 9, she says, "Listen, my beloved, behold, he is coming, climbing on the mountains, leaping on the hills." So here it is, she say, my beloved, he's coming, he's close by, he's here on the hills. And probably in her thinking, she knows that just as all the town people know what has happened to her, then word is spreading through the countryside that no doubt her shepherd knows what has happened to her. And he's coming for her, and he's there, and he'll be there for her. So she recognizes that he is close by. And then in verse 9 she says, "My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice." So she said he is like a gazelle, which is the male antelope, or a young stag, which is the male mountain goat. So she is using these male animals who protect their females and who are very manly creatures to describe her shepherd. She is describing him in a very manly way, and how that he is close by, he knows what's going on, he's curious, and he's available if she decides that she wants him. Then as she continues to think about him, she begins to remember his proposal that he had made to her. Now remember, King Solomon has just made a proposal to her over dinner. He has told her how beautiful she is, that like his mare among Pharaoh's chariots, she is just outstanding. So all Solomon has done up until this point is notice her beauty. And so she's going to compare that with what the shepherd has told her as they have had time together. And what she's going to remember, we're going to see, is the shepherd's first proposal for her. And in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 10 through 13, she's going to notice that he wants to be with her. He wants her to be a helper meet for him. Verse 10 says, "My beloved responded and said to me, Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. For behold, the winter is past, the rain is over and gone, the flowers have already appeared in the land, the time has arrived for pruning the vines, the voice of the turtle dove has been heard in our land, the fig tree has ripened its figs, and the vines in blossom have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along." Can you tell what time of year it is from this description? It's springtime, isn't it? Just like right now. The flowers are starting to blossom, and go out and look at the trees. There's little buds on them. And so it's springtime. And as we say, in the springtime, a young man's fancy turns to love. And of course, this is true during Bible times. During Bible times, the Jews had their two most favorite times for their weddings were just like they are today. The spring in June and the fall in autumn. Now, they liked to get married in the spring before they would start the spring planting and get ready for the harvest before their hard work was going to start. So you would get married before your labor began. Or you would get married in August after the harvest had taken place and you were able to relax and to enjoy your new bride. So these were their favorite times for weddings. And so he's simply telling her, come be my wife. Come be with me. It's springtime. It's time to put an end to this thing that is going on between you and Solomon. And come be my wife. Now, I think it is probably humanly impossible for us as women to fully appreciate exactly what it meant when God said in Genesis 2:18, before he created the woman, that it was not good for a man to be alone. Because we are women, I don't think we have the ability to fully understand just exactly how much a man needs a woman and how much she adds to his life. I have up here a book by George Gilder called Men and Marriage. And as you read this book, you can't tell whether George Gilder is a Christian or whether he has any interest in religion at all. But what George Gilder does is he goes back through history from the beginning of recorded history, and he traces the effect that women have had on men. He has traced the effect how men are when they do not have wives, and he has traced the effect of men when they do have wives. I think this book is an excellent commentary on Genesis 2:18. It is not good for a man to be alone. And in this book, he talks about what it is like for a man when he does not have a wife. He contributes a lot of the gang problems that we have in L.A., that we have in Tacoma, that we have in Seattle. He attributes a lot of these problems to these young men not being married. And you read the papers very much and see how these men are described. They are always single men. They are without jobs. They have no ambition in life, and they have time on their hands. And he says that the problem with gangs is not an economic problem. And a lot of times we see people trying to find an economic solution for the gangs. And he says this is not primarily an economic problem. He says one thing that contributes to the gangs is our welfare system, which encourages these men not to get married. If women get married, they have to give up certain benefits for child support. If they're going to school, they may have to give up certain schooling allowances or child care while they're in school. And it is economically better for a lot of these women not to get married. And so these men are encouraged not to get married. And because they're encouraged not to get married, George Gilder says in his book in here that men have a basic quality that when a man does not have a wife, then this makes it easy for him to be involved in gangs and other sort of things. And he says the basic quality that all men have is that all men are selfish. And he says, as he says that all men are selfish, and so I've been teaching these classes over the years and listening to women complain about their husbands, over and over I've heard women say, my husband is selfish. My husband is self-centered and thinking about himself. So I think when George Gilder says that, he's probably right. And he says that men are selfish because of their male hormones. Their male hormone, testosterone, is a hormone that makes the man very aggressive, very competitive. And God made men this way. And this is something that when a man is married, this hormone becomes a very good and productive thing. It makes a man want to go out and work and achieve and to provide for his wife and for his children. But when a man does not have a wife, when he does not have these responsibilities, then this hormone gets him into all kinds of troubles. Now, let me look here just a minute. Okay, and in talking about this man's need for women, George Gilder says that when you take a man who has only a high school education and you compare that man to a woman who has a college education, that if that man with just a high school education has a wife, then he normally earns more money than the college-educated woman. Now, the feminists come along and they say, see there, that's just men keeping their thumb down on women, and men really don't want to give women equal opportunity. But George Gilder says that is not true. A man with a wife with a high school education, he is willing to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to provide for his family. So he's willing to go out there and to work harder to provide for his family than the college-educated woman. But a man who does not have a wife, then he earns just about what a college-educated woman does. His earning abilities come down. Now, George Gilder says if you want to help your sons succeed, probably the best thing you can do for your sons is not to send them to college, but to encourage them to get married early, because getting married gives men the motivation to go out and to make the most of themselves. Now, he's not down on education, and I'm not down on education either. He's simply saying that marriage is more of a motivator to a man to succeed than college. So if he's got both of them, then you've got a man that is sure enough going to succeed. Now, there is also another thing that encourages these men not to get married besides economics and our welfare system. The other thing that encourages these young men not to get married is free sex. It's women giving them sex when they want it on demand. George Gilder says that the number one thing that will make a man give up his selfishness is sex. And if women are giving this sex to these men without marriage, then they are not motivated to get married. They are not motivated to give up their money, their things. They're not motivated to give up their selfishness and to take on the responsibilities of a family. So he's blaming really the gang problems on 2 things, on our welfare system and the changing morals in our society, where women are free to let a man have it all without responsibility, and that this is making these men continue in their selfishness. In our society today, we have the largest number of bachelors, unmarried men, college-educated men in our country than we have ever had before. Men who have, from their viewpoint, they've got it all. They've got a good-paying job. They've got a nice car, a nice house, and all the sex they want. No reason at all to make the sacrifice of taking on the responsibilities of a wife and a family. When a man marries, his life expectancy goes up. The men who have the highest rate of death are unmarried men. Young men have a much higher death rate than men who are married. And as a man is married, if his wife dies and he is widowed, then his life expectancy goes down again. He is more susceptible to dying. If he marries again, then his life expectancy goes up again. He's going to live longer. And what George Gilder says, what he attributes this to, is not to a man having a wife to nag him to be careful and not to do this, but he's saying that men who do not have a wife have no purpose in life. And a lot of these men just simply lose their desire to live. So a woman gives a man his purpose in life, and she makes his life more meaningful for him. She causes him to give up his selfish nature where he's willing to share his abilities and look out for someone else. So when the shepherd tells the Shulammite, be with me, come away from these places and be with me. It's springtime. My thoughts are turning to love. And he's wanting her to be his companion. Then she is going to be someone who is really going to be a good helper for him and able to help him subdue the earth and to accomplish all that God would want him to accomplish. I have up here a copy of a newspaper article, and I am going to pass you out a copy of this article during our break, because it is a very fascinating article to read, and I'm not going to take time to read all of it. This man right here, as you can see him, his name is Stephen Hawking, and he is one of the most brilliant physicists in our country today. And in this article, he was giving a speech at a college, and he has Lou Gehrig's disease. And he has a computer here that he talks through a computer. He not only cannot walk, but he cannot talk. It takes him 2 hours to punch 1 sentence into his computer. So obviously, in order to present a speech for a college, then he had to prepare his speech ahead of time, and he sits here and he flips the charts, and his computer talks for him. This man is very handicapped, but yet he has a very influential job as one of the most leading recognized physicists in our country. Other people who work with him are just amazed at the mathematical equations that he can do in his head. I want to read to you down here at the bottom just a little bit for you to understand the effect that a woman has had on him. It tells about him. It says gradually as he got this disease in college. It says when he was going to college, it says he was a good student and he was plenty bright, but he was just kind of coasting along. And then he got this disease. And when he got this disease, it says gradually his muscles atrophied. He lost the ability to walk, to turn the pages of a book, to hold a pencil, to feed himself. But 2 years after that diagnosis, Hawkins recognized that the condition had stabilized. Then he fell in love with a young undergraduate, Jane Wilde. He said, in order to get married, I had to get a job. And in order to get a job, I needed to finish my thesis, he said. As a result, Hawkins is married and has 3 children, and science has a bundle of new theories. So the whole thing that motivated this man, he was in college without a wife before he got this disease, unmotivated, just drifting along. 2 years after he got the disease, he fell in love, and his whole life changed. He went out and he got a job and has become really one of the most productive people that we have in our society today. And so I will pass you out a copy of that whole article about him, because it is a fascinating article to read about the power of a woman to transform a man. Now, as we continue talking about the Song of Solomon, we're going to see that she is comparing the shepherd's proposal to Solomon's, that we're going to see that the shepherd also wants her to be his source of comfort. We see this in Song of Solomon 2, verse 14. And here it is, in her mind, she's remembering the shepherd saying, O my dove, in the clefts of the rock, in the secret place of the steep pathway, let me see your form, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your form is lovely. So here it is, he calls her his dove, his source of peace, his source of comfort, and he says that she's in the clefts of the rock. And in case you can't recognize this picture up here, these are our rock cliffs. And when we think about rock cliffs, then we realize if we're going to go climb a rock, that's just not something we can just go out and do. It's something that takes some preparation, maybe it takes proper gear, perhaps some training. And so he's telling her, he says, this is where you are. You're like in the clefts of the rock. You are inaccessible to me. You don't belong to me yet. You're not my wife yet. Please come down from this inaccessible place and be mine. Belong to me. And why does he want her to belong to him? Because she's his dove. And also he says, let me see your form, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your form is lovely. Now what he's talking about here is her feminine qualities that are especially appealing to a man. A woman's voice has 5 ranges in it as compared to a man's voice, which only has 3 ranges. So a woman's voice is different than a man, and God has designed a woman's voice to be soothing to a man. Not only the things she says to him, but her tone of voice is something that is very important to her, and the shepherd wants to be around her and to hear her voice. In addition, a woman's body is very different from a man's. A woman's body has about 20% more fat than a man's body does, which adds to her lovely form to the man and makes her soft and tender to be touched. And so he is wanting to be comforted by her in this way. We've talked a little bit before about the differences between the male and the female, and we're going to talk a lot more about it in our class today, about how it is that when a fetus is in the womb, at the age of 6 weeks within a womb, the male fetus is his whole body, every cell in his body as he is developing and being formed is being bathed with the male hormone testosterone. It affects his brain cells. It affects his muscle cells. A man's muscle cells are different. If you would look at them under a microscope, they are different than a woman's muscle cells. The female fetus begins to be bathed with her hormones at the age of 12 weeks. And this affects the deposit of fat in her body. It affects her brain. Everything about her is affected from the time that she is from 12 weeks old in the womb. So there are built-in differences between the men and women that have nothing to do with the way we're brought up and our environment. Okay, here's Hagar. Hagar sometimes is a good example of different qualities of marriage, and he illustrates this one that we've been talking about this morning. Hagar says, I lost the ship, the battle, the loot, the booze. I was shot at, stabbed at, sunk and dunked. A witch put a curse on me. The dog ruined my new bearskin. And now I'm getting a head cold. And he sighs. Hagar's solution is, I need a hug. So there he is talking about the special qualities that women have to make things be all right for their husbands. Now, as we continue in the Song of Solomon, we've seen the shepherd's proposal to her. He wants her to come and to be his wife, to be with him, to be his companion. He wants her to be his source of comfort. Then we're going to see her attitude toward him in verse 15. Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 15. Here it is, she tells the shepherd in her mind, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that are ruining the vineyards, while our vineyards are in blossom. Now, it's real easy right here to picture what's happening. She's a vineyard keeper. It's springtime. The grapevines are just starting to bud out. And you know, all little animals, all new little animals. Here are the little foxes that are just new and just probably a few months old. All little animals love to play and horse around. And it's so easy to picture these little foxes scampering up and down the rows of the vines, knocking the blossoms off, which is going to affect their crop. So she's got a legitimate problem, and she turns to the shepherd. He's the one she looks at to be her protector. And women have a logical reason for looking to their husbands to be their protector. And that is because men just have a tremendous amount of strength. As we're talking about their male hormones bathing their bodies, men have about 1/3 more strength in their upper body than a woman does. They have larger lungs, they have larger shoulders, and they have more strength in their arms, and they're more able to do things than women. Men also have stronger strength in their legs and are able to run faster, especially over short distances. So when she asks him to come catch the foxes, then she is picking the one who is most suitable for the job. He is more suitable for this job than she is. Now, I have down here at the bottom a picture of a couch potato. You see the man laying here. He's obviously out of shape. He's got a can of beer, he's smoking, and all he's doing is just laying around, slouching around. Now, I put this picture of a couch potato up here to illustrate a point. A man, because of his hormones and the way God has made him, a man who just lays on the couch, for a woman to have the same kind of strength as a man who just lays on the couch, then what she's got to do is she's got to get involved in aerobics and bodybuilding, and she has got to really work just to have the same amount of strength as the couch potato does just laying there. But if she stops exercising like this woman has in her picture, then she is going to lose it. The only way she can keep that kind of strength is if she works at it. Now, a teenage girl has about the same strength, a normal teenage girl has about the same strength as a 63-year-old man. A man who is starting to lose his strength still has more strength than a teenage girl, because this is just the way God has made him. Now, every muscle that a man has in his entire body is stronger than a woman's body, except for one muscle. A woman has one muscle that is as strong as a man's muscle. Does anybody have an idea what that muscle is? Heart. No, not their heart. Men have larger hearts, yes. Well, man doesn't have one to compare. Man has this same muscle, but you're getting close. Her strongest muscle is her stomach muscle. And of course, she needs a strong stomach muscle because she does give birth and she needs to have that strength. So the only muscle that women have in their bodies that is as strong as the man's is the stomach muscle. Now, in your assignment, and you don't have to copy it down right now because I'll be giving you your assignment on a paper a little bit later, I'm going to have you read the chapter on the weaker vessel and the stronger vessel. In those chapters, if you have the old book, there's some information on this, but in the last 10 years, there has been a tremendous amount of information come out about the mental and the physical differences between men and women. So if you have the new book, then you're going to have the benefit of that information. But when you read those two chapters, those are two chapters that I had a lot of fun writing because there is so much information out. And I think you will enjoy reading those chapters. We don't have time in class to go over all the differences between men and women, but I'd like for you and the teenagers too to read those chapters so that you can fully appreciate the differences between men and women and the way that God has designed us and made us. Now, as we continue in her thinking about the shepherd, and the things that he is going to be doing for her. She also is viewing her as her provider, one who's going to take care of her. And this is also something that young girls would be very well to stop and look at. What kind of a provider is this young man going to be? In Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 16, she says, "Catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that are running the vineyards." That's 15, I just read. Verse 16, she says, "My beloved is mine, and I am his. He pastures his flock among the lilies." So she's just taking it for granted that he's a good shepherd. He is out working. He is taking care of these flocks, and I know that he is going to provide for me. When we get to the classes on the desperate marriage, we're going to find out that one type of abuse is financial abuse, where a husband will not provide properly for his wife. And this causes as much anxiety and marital problems as some of these other types of abuse, like physical and mental abuse. So financial abuse or financial neglect is really a serious problem. And so young girls need to look at a young man and think about, what kind of a provider is he going to be? I had a girl in my class one time that came up and told me that she had been dating a young fella whose custom it was to work at a job for a while and earn some money, and then he would just get bored with it and he would quit and live off of the money he had earned. And then when that money ran out, he'd get another job and he'd work at it for a little while, and then he'd quit and live off of that money. And this had been this man's pattern of life. And so he proposed to this young girl, and she expressed some concern about his working habits. And you know what he told her? He said, "Oh, but it'll be different with you. I marry you, I'll keep a job all the time." Well, her attitude was, "It's too risky. I'm already seeing this pattern, and I don't want to take a chance on you." And I think that was probably a wise decision upon her part, because this is something that is very important. If I marry this man, am I going to be continually writing letters to the creditors and dodging their phone calls, this sort of thing? Because this is something that causes a tremendous problem for a lot of women. Then as we continue seeing her attitude towards the shepherd, she also wants him to be her leader in verse 17. She says, "Until the cool of the day, when the shadows flee away," which is evening time, "turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of Bether." And of course, we started off our class talking about how she uses these expressions to be like a gazelle or a young stag. And each time she uses it, she's wanting him to be manly. Be like these male animals that lead the females and to take care of them and be a man in all ways. Now, when we continue to think about the different ways that God has made men and women, God has also created men and women different in their mental abilities. And I know that the feminists don't like for us to talk this way because they claim there really is no difference between the ears, between a man and a woman. But science has discovered that there is a difference between men and women. Science has discovered this in their treatment of stroke patients. Doctors used to treat all stroke patients exactly alike, and then some doctors began to notice that women had recovered more easily from strokes than men did, and they began to look to see if maybe there was a difference between the male and the female brain, and maybe they should be treating the patients differently. Doctors discovered that there was a difference, and they now treat stroke patients differently based upon whether or not they are a man or a woman. What they have discovered is that in a woman's brain, that a woman uses both sides of her brain simultaneously, that she is continually going back and forth between the two sides of her brain. Now, if a woman has a stroke and part of her brain is damaged, the other side of her brain can take over and can recapture those lost abilities that were damaged by the stroke. And women have generally a more complete recovery from a stroke than men do. However, men do not think that way. Men have used different sides of their brains for different projects. They think on one side for one thing and on the other side for another thing, and they can think independently between the two sides. Consequently, when a man has a stroke, the other side of his brain cannot take over for the damaged side of his brain, and his damage done to his brain is of a more permanent nature than that of a woman. So men and women just simply think differently. And this gives the man advantages for his job, and it gives the woman advantages for her job that God has given her to do. Men have the ability to be tremendous problem solvers. They have the ability to focus focus in on a problem and just focus in on that problem and find a solution. Whereas women, in their thinking, they look at things more through intuition. We remember better than our husbands do. And so when we have a problem, instead of just focusing in on that problem, we remember what happened 10 years ago, and we're reacting to what happened 10 years ago plus what happened today, and we can blow something all out of proportion and really make a big deal out of it. Now, this is a disadvantage for solving problems and making financial decisions and things like this, but this is an advantage for being a mother, because we can see patterns in things that our husbands would never see unless we point it out. We're raising our children and our child does something and we say, well, this is kind of like what he did over here 2 years ago, and I think I'm starting to see a pattern and we need to nip this in the bud. And so we change our actions and we try to guide and to mold that child in this way. The man, his thinking on one side or the other is also an advantage, because a man can go to work and he can forget the problems at home. He can focus in on his job at work and concentrate on it. But you know, a woman, if she's got some kind of problems, she can't forget. She takes them with her everywhere she goes. She can't even do the dishes without remembering her problems. We're single-minded in that way, and our problems eat on us. And what this does is this drives women to find solutions to their problems. And so women can exert a tremendous amount of influence in the home because we have this inner drive that will not let us rest until we find a solution. Now, lots of times women tell me, my husband doesn't care. Well, that's not true. He does care. But he cares like a man. He doesn't care like a woman. God has made men so that they can be distracted from their problems, because if a man was like a woman, where he couldn't get away from his problems, there would be a lot more on-the-job accidents, because a man's work would be hampered by him worrying about his problem. So this is something that is an advantage to the man, and we need to appreciate that advantage. When I first discovered this quality in my husband of being able to think on one side of the brain or the other, there's also another advantage to it, and that is that men can do two complex jobs at the same time. And I discovered this quality in my husband when he and I both got our computers, and one time I went into his office and he was sitting there typing something into his computer, and at the same time the news was on over here. And so I was sure he was not listening to the news because he was typing, and I wanted to tell him something. So as I started to talk to him, he said, shh, I'm listening to that. And he goes on typing all the time. And I thought, well, if he can do that, I can do that. So I had some typing I needed to do and had a program I wanted to watch. So I went down to my computer to type in some stuff that was already written. I didn't even have to think about it. I just had to type the words in, and I was going to watch this show. And I went crazy trying to do two things at the same time. And I kept thinking, well, if he can do that, I can do that. But then I read in the book I told you about a couple of weeks ago about men and women, what's the difference, about how our brains work differently. Men have the ability to do two jobs at once. And I realized that was part of his masculinity, that he could do that. And it's part of my femininity that I can't, and I'm never going to be able to do that, no matter how long I practice and how hard I try. So God has created the man and the woman different mentally, giving them different assets for the job that they're going to do, and that this is something that is an advantage to them. Now, as we continue to think about the different ways that God has made men and women, and we look out in nature, we also see that in nature, God creates his beings the way they need to be for their jobs. For example, polar bears have built-in sunglasses, something they need in living in the environment they live in. But grizzly bears and brown bears, they don't have sunglasses because they don't need them. Ducks have built-in weatherproofing because they need this to be swimming in the water. Chickens do not have this because they don't swim in the water. Chickens can drown simply because they don't have this. Our God is very creative in the way he has made everybody and made them suited for their environment. God has also given human beings, different qualities so that they can survive in different environments. Up here I have a picture about the Eskimos, and I want you to listen to the special qualities that God has given Eskimos so that they can survive in their environment. It says up here that Eskimos live in the Arctic regions, where temperatures rarely go above freezing because they are short, average 5'2", they lose little body heat. They burn food rapidly, which regulates body temperature. And then it says, and blood vessels are arranged so that more blood flows to exposed parts, such as their hands and their face. And it says, thus, Eskimos can work in sub-zero temperatures with bare hands and bare faces without any complications. So really, this is a marvelous way that God has created Eskimos so that they are especially suited for their environment, able to work without needing gloves. Now, there's something else that we can learn about the Eskimos. You know, as I was talking to you earlier about the hormones and the difference between the babies, the fetuses in the womb, as these hormones are bathing the fetuses' minds and bodies in the womb, there's some other changes that are also taking place. The minute that a little baby boy is born, he is attracted to novel sights. Sight is what gets his attention. If you have a fussy little boy, then you soothe him by showing him his mobile in his crib and taking him around and showing them pictures on the wall. However, a little girl baby, the moment she is born, the way you soothe her is with your voice, the things you are saying to her. She's not as interested in different sights. Little boys are more visual than little girls are. If you ever watch a little boy, he's always jumping up and down. He's always climbing on rocks. He's always jumping off of rocks. He's climbing up in trees. He's jumping out of trees. I mean, you can't make a little boy be still. He's always moving and he's always jumping. And as he is doing this, he is developing his spatial abilities. His abilities that has to do with his mathematical abilities, his abilities later on to design skyscrapers, to build bridges, to read maps. These are all things he is developing through his movement. As we are born, each one of us has a blueprint in our brain. In our brain, we have a certain ability, potential for spatial abilities. Girls and boys both have it. And so we have this potential, and then however our environment is, that determines to the degree that we will develop those abilities. So the differences between men and women are not only part of our innate nature, but they are also affected by our environment. Now, the Eskimos can teach us something else about this, too. When you go to Alaska and you measure the spatial ability of Eskimos, you find that the women, the female Eskimos, have a greater spatial ability than city-born men do. Because they are living out into the open, they're living through space, and they're outside, and their ability is being developed to its full potential, and so they have a greater ability than men do. City-born men. But when you compare an Eskimo woman with an Eskimo man who was raised in exactly the same environment, then that Eskimo man has a greater spatial ability than the Eskimo women. So we are going to find times when women do have greater abilities in some of these areas than men, perhaps because they were tomboys that got out and roughhoused and played this way too, but it is something that is involved, comes from their environment. So if you will spend some time reading those two chapters that I talked to you a little bit about earlier, then you're going to be discovering even more differences between men and women, and it's kind of fun, I think, to see the differences in the way that God has made us.